Thank you very, very much for the award and for having me here. I am very, very pleased to talk a little bit with all of you today, but first I have to let you know I am not a conservationist or a scientist, but I know a little bit about how trees and other green infrastructure fit into the built environment and how that built environment actually affects the people and the decisions that we make. But being here today does cause me to reflect a bit on how did I get to be here today? You know, here I am, a black woman from an inner city ghetto in America. And it's interesting because just a few weeks ago, I gave a presentation at my local community board, planning board, to solicit input about a project that means so much to me right now, and it's a transformational real estate development project. Our goal is to tear down this former juvenile detention facility and build in its place a mixed income housing and mixed use commercial development. And it'll incorporate the highest standards of job creation and green building standards and open space development and even aspirational community development. And I see it as an amazing platform for social, environmental, and economic change in our country. But at this presentation, there was this one member of the planning board who decided very early on that he hated me. He hated my presentation and everything that I was talking about. This man twisted my words and at one point threatened to throw me and my staff out of the meeting. And several years ago, I probably would have been traumatized by having this level of hostility thrown at me, but I'll be very honest with you that I'm a little older and wiser now. However, it was still a shock to be the target of that level of contempt. A little part of me was actually fearful that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't that smart or that powerful, and that I didn't have a right to have that big a vision, and I certainly didn't have the right to talk about it. The name for that condition is called imposter syndrome. It's not a documented medical condition, but it means that you kind of feel that all the good things you offer the world really aren't there, that you got in by mistake, that you're not the person that everybody thinks you are, and that maybe you're not even the person that you think you are. Which brings me back to here. How did a poor black girl from the South Bronx in New York City get to be with all of you fine people here today? Well, just like you, I belong here, and wherever else we want to be. So imposter syndrome aside, statistically speaking, I really shouldn't be here. I'm from the South Bronx in New York City, and I grew up in the 1970s during a time when America's cities were actually emptying out into the suburbs, and neighborhoods like mine were actually burning, literally. The economics of the times made it more profitable for landlords to burn their own buildings down, commit arson, and collect insurance money rather than trying to reinvest in them. You know, back then, the landscape of my community looked a lot like Florence did after the World War II bombings. And kids like me at that point were way more likely to end up pregnant, on drugs, or dead, or a combination of all of the above. My own brother, who survived 2 separate tours in Vietnam, was killed as a result of the drug wars in the neighborhood next door to mine. What I grew up with was a very far cry from the South Bronx that my parents moved into in the late 1940s in search of their great American dream. They, like many Black and Latino Americans, from the south of the United States or the Caribbean, were descendants of American slaves, and they'd moved up north in search of a better life. And as one might expect, I did everything that I could to get out of my neighborhood. And for me, education was the way for me to get out. And nobody blamed me. But several years later, when I was penniless and attending graduate school, I had to move back in with my parents. But once I returned home, I realized that the regulations and all the land use decisions and top-down planning had created the kind of economic patterns in the South Bronx of my youth. We used to have lots of manufacturing in our community that people would walk to work to, and then all of that went away, and these are the type of things that came there. All that things led directly to the environmental abuses in the South Bronx of today. We handle way more than 30% of the city's waste, construction and municipal waste, 70% of its sewage, and also we have 4 power plants and the diesel emissions from more than 60,000 diesel truck trips that go through our community each and every week. And all of this is within a 1 square mile radius. But the South Bronx is not alone. Communities like it across the nation and around the world are point sources for the greenhouse gases that everyone wants to curb now. This is not strictly a consumption issue, but rather it's an issue of environmental. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm an American. I speak really quickly. You'll have to forgive me. But I'll try really hard. So, I don't even know I'm doing it. But this is not simply a consumption issue. This is an issue of environmental equality in that poor people get poorly designed infrastructure. If we had located all of our energy, agribusiness, transportation, and waste handling in wealthy communities as quickly as we do in poor ones, we would have had a clean and green environment decades ago. The health effects of being in such close proximity to these pollution sources is felt in the painfully high asthma rates, in our community. And obesity and diabetes follow suit because most people do not consider going out for, a brisk walk just for exercise, or if they fear that their kids are going to get hit by a truck if they go outside, and not to mention the fact that in many poor communities around our country, it's not easy to find healthy and affordable, decent food. But there's also conclusive evidence showing, and this to me is the worst, that proximity to fossil fuel emissions causes learning disabilities in our young children. And statistically, in America, at least, poor kids who don't perform poorly in school go to jail. So it's like we've created a pipeline directly from poverty to prisons. In my own hometown, I work to create solutions to the environmental and economic issues that we experienced. So for advocating for more sustainable solid waste management, or for transforming an illegal waste dump into an national award-winning park within the country, and it's become an amazing place for people in our community to really learn and be a part of and love. And I got married in this park, and that's the dog that was with me when I discovered that first dump. I just love her. She was my flower girl. But we also worked to develop the South Bronx Greenway, which is an 11-mile network of bike and pedestrian paths that serve as stormwater management, alternative transportation infrastructure, healthy recreation, and of course a catalyst for local economic development. I wrote the successful $1.25 million federal transportation grant that secured more than $50 million for first phase funding. So this is just what it looked like in one of the early phases. And this is what we have now. And this is just the beginning. And this began in 2010. And we also implemented the Bronx Environmental Stewardship Training Program, which created a skilled workforce and with an economic stake in the environmental development of our own community. And we also used projects such as green roof installation, and that's a sustainable building technique where you plant a roof for the stormwater management techniques. And we started an installation business as a way to show that we can produce policies. And we also worked to create a regional coalition to pass legislation around green infrastructure incentives and also guidelines into law on the city and state level. But we still have the manifestation, of inequality in our own communities. And that's a problem, not just a moral one, but it's an economic problem as well, and we're all concerned about the economy right now. But I do have some pretty decent news. Every time the social order has been disrupted and brought closer to equality, economic prosperity, has followed. The critical need for community renewal and job creation has given rise to a new perspective called environmental equality. Historically, greater equality has always brought greater prosperity. Think of the American Revolution, the abolition of slavery, women's right to vote, the civil rights movement, or even the development of the internet. Granted, none of these particular social upheavals were perfect by any means. For example, citizens of the British colonies in America fought for and later won their independence. However, slaves, in that same era, were hardly ever considered free, at least not at that time. But one cannot deny that all of these developments helped level the playing field and brought about levels of economic prosperity that people could not have dreamed of. It also happens when I start to get excited, so I'll get less excited. But one cannot deny that all of these developments helped level the playing field and brought about levels of economic prosperity that none of us could have dreamed of. And they inspired those that were left out of those previous battles for equality and to dream about and work toward their own. So what does environmental equality look like? It looks like you don't have to move out of your neighborhood in order to live in a better one, because everyone has equal access to clean water, clean air, clean soil, and a quality built environment. Environmental equality links the revitalization of neighborhood, environmental, and economic conditions to improve public health and quality of life. Green-collar jobs, or jobs that offer sustainable services and products for communities and consumers, has implications for economic recovery and a healthy future for everyone. In terms of the great city of Florence, how does this apply? Well, you have some of the world's most famous and beautiful gardens, but in the ancient, beautiful, winding streets and piazzas, there's very little green. How will Florence adapt to the changing climate? And when will you have more and more hot days of summer and more periods of intense rain? And I know that there are some, people thinking in Florence, why are these environmentalist tree people trying to change Florence? Well, Florence has changed many times. You changed from a walled city to a Renaissance capital. The Medicis changed it into a world power. World War II changed this city. And you in this room may be the ones that will meet the challenges of climate and economy by reimagining the piazzas, and the economy, and as well as by retrofitting them and also retrofitting existing buildings and streets with green infrastructure and features to help naturally cool the air and channel rainwater into the earth instead of into water treatment facilities. You in this room may be the ones to create the accessible jobs and green infrastructure that provide municipal services, as well as proven therapeutic benefits for anyone that works with horticulture. You heard Roger's really wonderful talk about the therapeutic benefit of it. It applies when you're just working, with horticulture as well, and that because it is so critically important for people, when you're talking about disconnected youth, or even those that are suffering from the trauma of war, of prison, or of poverty. The Renaissance period was famous for combining the forces of science and art and beauty, and it is your tradition, and you need to rise to that challenge. The world needs leaders who are not ashamed to stand up and say that they are unwilling, literally unwilling, to leave this world in the same unfortunate condition that we created. We have been led to believe that in order to succeed, there'll be collateral damages, and sometimes those damages include people. But you know that building a sustainable world, is not only necessary, it is possible and within our lifetime. Of course, when you know you're doing something right, there will be vested interests that will be afraid of the change that you want to make. Gather strength from your allies, your brothers and sisters who will see the attacks and want to support you. Try not to be either a victim or an aggressor. Granted, sometimes both can be used to successfully elicit responses, but the real power comes from when you find that sweet spot between the two and explain it in a way that brings people along with you. Now, I can't say that I always do that, but I can tell you that I always regret it when I don't, because people are counting on me to be a leader and exercise my power responsibly. I am counting on you to be committed to do the very same. People are aching. People are aching for leaders to inspire them to believe that there is another way. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling helpless in any way, the best thing that you can do is help somebody else. And that is real power. None of us have the time to wallow in our own sense of imposter syndrome. This moment of change that we find ourselves in right now is the mountaintop. And the mountaintop that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of he was not alone up there looking out on the promised land. I was up there with him. And so were you, all my brothers and sisters that are here with me today. We are a community. And community is not just a place. Community is an activity. It is the responsibility that you exercise. It is the responsibility that you live up to. It is the responsibility that you, Florence, will live up to and show that Florence will lead for itself. Viva Firenze. Thank you.